Hello, my name is Frank Catita. I'm a senior strategist for Chime. We'd like to thank you for joining us today for our webinar entitled Accelerated Storage is a Foundational Cybersecurity Recovery Pillar, the CISO Perspective. What we're going to do today is just do a brief intro of our distinguished panel here, and then jump right into the Q&A. We'd like to thank Pure Storage and John Kimbrell for sponsoring this today. So we're going to have a lively conversation on something that's a little bit different, perhaps, than you're used to hearing. One of the things I wanted to start with is that, according to our most recent Chime Digital Health Most Wired survey, we found that a troubling statistic that somewhere between 40 to 50% of organizations couldn't restore mission critical control of their data within 4 hours of the occurrence. On top of that, we found that many of them took 24 hours at least to restore this data, which, needless to say, has various financial, political, business implications. And this is sort of where it's all coming in terms of what we're talking about today. So without further ado, again, my name is Frank Catita from Chime Digital Health Insights. I'd like to start with our panelists, first perhaps with John, and then working around to Jesse and Sahan.
Yes, John Kimberly with Pure Storage. I've been with Pure Storage almost 5 years now on the health and life sciences team, but mostly focused on providers. But before coming to Pure, I spent 30 years in healthcare, and the last 20 was with a large 4-state, 30-hospital system. Actually, sat in the CIO seat for a short while, but most of it was around VP of IT strategy and planning and clinical transformation.
Jesse?
Jesse Fasolo. I actually oversee all the technology infrastructure and cybersecurity for a healthcare system in New Jersey called St. Joseph's Health. Approximately 2 acute care facilities, about 1,000 beds, 50 offsite clinics and practices as well. Been in healthcare for 10 years. Prior to that, came from finance, banking, retail, and legal. So bringing a combination of all that experience into healthcare. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Sahan?
Hi, good morning. I'm Sahan Fernando. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Rady Children's Hospital. We're a health system based out of San Diego, California, serving patients all over. One main inpatient, but plenty out in the community as well. Prior to joining Rady, I worked mainly in the consulting and managed service spaces, primarily in information security, and appreciate being here.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. One of the themes that comes up in our writing and some of the research that we've done is this overarching question of why a CISO would want to talk to a flash array storage company. It just didn't seem to be the normal fit, but apparently it is. So I'm just wondering where in your own organizations and from John, from the vendor's point of view, and dealing with a wide variety of people, how do you see this intersection coming about? And if it is something that you're doing more than people typically know about, and where does it come together in your organization as far as the what I would call the cyber storage dream team? Sahan, you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you hit it on the head. Number one being that as there is more reliance from our operational partners on technology to drive better outcomes for our patients, whether it's on, purely the outcome side, whether it's on quality, whether it's on safety, continuity of care, right? There's a significant amount of data that is involved in that. Even something as basic as our clinicians rely heavily on the MAR, the medical administration record, right? And if we can't provide that to them, that negatively impacts the patients. And so realistically, we'll always talk about the confidentiality, integrity, availability triad, and availability for healthcare providers is first and foremost our primary responsibility. And so everything that goes into that includes storage.
Jesse, I know your team is using some flash array storage, and you're looking at the cybersecurity aspects of that. How did this all come together as you were deploying those kinds of systems?
With my role, kind of overseeing technology and cybersecurity, you get the best of both worlds. So one, I understand the technology and how to implement it and the use case thereof, but also the requirement to secure it, as Sahan said, the patient data and the reliability and access and is paramount in a healthcare organization. So for me specifically, the enterprise storage became a conversation from a CISO level is because it's really truly one of the main components within the infrastructure that an organization has to either recover or sustain or provide or enable the organization, all their applications, all their environment. So it essentially becomes one of the most important components, as well as pretty much what they say is all your eggs in one basket. It is literally the basket that holds all your eggs within the organization from an infrastructure perspective. And then moving forward, I think the relevance of security around storage became paramount after 2020, around 2020, when NIST actually started creating their own special publication just for storage, because it was an environment where it was lackluster from a security perspective and no guidance or baselines were provided. So now you're seeing the CISO be in the conversation about the acquisition, the storage purchase, the maintenance on it, firmware, all the intricacies where the CISO needs to be present and understanding all of those components.
John, how has this intersection changed your go-to-market strategy at Pure Storage?
Well, I don't know to what degree it has changed it, but we're certainly amplifying some of the capabilities. I think the points are very well taken that, that the data is important, and that's really the core asset of the organization from a cybersecurity perspective. But what we're starting to see a little more appreciation of is, what are the capabilities that are, on the storage array itself that can help a CISO accomplish, their cybersecurity outcomes. So whether it's, protecting, detecting, responding, or recovering, how at a storage level can we accelerate, those outcomes? And we'll probably talk more about that, but just really as opposed to being just a place where the data resides, it actually participates in in reducing the impact and exposure.
I think the interesting thing that I found out in doing the research is that Pure Storage has a number of alliances with the traditional cloud storage companies as well. So this is not the perception of having an exclusive storage arrangement that you have to complement it with other areas. I'm just curious in terms of, the whole thing these days is workforce. In the folks that are doing this on a day-to-day basis in terms of deploying it, Jesse and Sahan, what kind of skill sets do you need for people to understand these two areas? I mean, do security people naturally understand storage, and do storage people naturally understand cybersecurity? Who are the characters that you have to build in terms of your workforce to do this, Jesse?
From my perspective, I find from a high level, a CISO really needs to have an infrastructure understanding and background to understand the components and how to secure them. The inverse, from a storage leadership perspective, they need to be much more informed about all the security requirements and baselines and configurations and guidelines that are out there. Of course, they're relatively new. There's a lot of them to consider. And I think getting both the CISO and the VP of infrastructure in a room to talk through it is very important. From a team perspective, many infrastructure personnel don't fully understand all the security requirements that are pushed upon them. So they really need education from that perspective to bring them up to speed of why we're doing this. The CISO or the security team advising them on the encryption level or how to secure the login and the backup window or the snapshot window and how we're going to offload and why we need to do this and what the RPO and RTO is. Sometimes a storage engineer at that point is just trying to sustain the storage, make sure there's ample growth, a targeted number as far as restoration points, and it's very minimum from a security perspective. So I think there is education that needs to be had on the infrastructure side, the security and or knowledge there needs to be increased.
Sahan, how do you go about on the education side to increase the skill set in that area?
Always a hot topic for us, and especially right now. I fully agree with everything Jesse said, and we try and be as proactive as possible. There is so much why behind the what that we have to go through, and talking about not just potential risks, but also the varying degrees of impact that any of those being actualized can have. Those are some long conversations at times, and it requires us to be able to not just speak in terms of their language, right? Speak in appropriate metaphors to make sure that the message is actually being received and that they have the opportunity to provide their feedback as well, but also understanding what goes into that. And I would go even maybe a little deeper in terms of understand, like Jesse said, understanding how their areas work and all the various layers that go into that. So we, for instance, have had a lot of recent conversations with our storage teams on here are the controls that we have in place. If we have performance impacts, here's where we would recommend starting first in terms of troubleshooting. Here are the controls that are stronger that we feel more strongly about from a risk reduction standpoint versus these other ones might have various compensating factors where they're not as important. And so not just what goes into everything Jesse said, but even just how is that packet moving throughout the network? How does SMB work? Are we using iSCSI, right? If we're doing on Flash, what does that look like even from a physical standpoint, right? How does Flash work? We're accountable? Are we following through on, is that Flash storage being properly disposed of? Items like that. And so it's a lot of reading on our part as well. We try not to blast them with too many articles and do more in terms of conversation.
That's very helpful. John, I'm sure you do a lot on the onboarding side for both of these skill sets for the security and the storage side. What does Pure Storage do to get people up to what some of the differences are in terms of security related storage issues?
Well, I mean, from a storage engineer perspective, Pure is fairly simple. So when it comes to skill sets, there's not a heavy lift there. But I think Jesse touched on it's really helping the storage engineers understand some of the security priorities, and then he was spot on where they're usually worried about capacity and the performance, not necessarily some of the larger cybersecurity objectives. But concrete example, on the storage array, on the Pure Storage array, there's a feature called safe mode, which snapshots are immutable, but this also layers in the ability to not have them deleted, or if they're deleted or restored, you need at least two people authenticating at the same time with support. So while it doesn't protect from ransomware, it allows for a rapid recovery from the primary array, and really nothing's faster than recovering from a safe mode protected snapshot on the primary array. So that's a feature, but does the CISO in the organization have visibility that exists? Is it a part of the plan? Those are all things that we try to help educate. As Jesse said, it's really about conversations, education, and as Sahan said, helping people understand really the why behind everything. So from their perspective, they can elevate opportunities.
I have to ask, I ask this all the time as professor of organizational behavior, Katita, are there any areas where when you're going through the process of researching or deploying this, where there's bickering between different kinds of people about certain kinds of issues related to the deployment of the programs?
Well, I mean, I can start. I think human behavior is fairly universal, and I think Sahan hit on the head. Unless otherwise acted upon, you focus on the priorities that are important to you, and you're not thinking about things that may be important to the organization that someone else is thinking about. So really, the cross-functional conversations and helping people understand some of the objectives, asking for their advice from their perspective, help break that down. But in general, people are pretty focused and heads down on the things that they're accountable for directly.
Any pushbacks that you see, Jesse, in the work that you're doing?
I think as the environment and the threat landscape changes, that culture shift has already started. Especially with healthcare being attacked directly and third parties being attacked, impacting healthcare in general. You see that the culture of security is more adaptive, and teams are more apt to learn about cybersecurity, especially since cybersecurity as just a career choice is becoming more of a adopted path for many storage and or infrastructure engineers, because the future is not just deploying the technology and as John mentioned, keeping it alive, or mentioning or focusing on just their task. It's becoming, how do we make this secure and how do we provide better value?
Great answer. Sahan?
Yeah, I mean, All very well said. And the only thing I would add is that ultimately it comes down to what are our incentives, and I'm incentivized to try and keep things secure and everything that goes into that, and they're incentivized to keep things up, running, available. And so we're always going to be working on that intersection of that risk mitigation and the outcomes for the organization.
Great. John, you sort of coined, it might be out there already, but you coined this the term disaster recovery as a service. I'm wondering what the vision is from Pure Storage for that, and in the AI cybersecurity driven world that we live in right now, how you go about extending that.
Well, I mean, from a vision perspective, I think broadly, it's just really to, have data platform solutions that support wherever your disaster recovery is going to live. So whether it's on-prem or in the public cloud or in a private cloud, all those decisions are really up to the organization. So it's really a flexible, agile platform that would allow for disaster recovery, as a service, either assembled by an organization or through a service provider. The entire portfolio can be consumed as a service or the traditional CapEx. We're starting to see some interest in putting that that disaster recovery instance in the public cloud. Cloud Block Store can allow that to be done efficiently and at a substantial reduced storage cost price. So the vision is really just for flexibility. There's no one solution that's going to be right for everybody. So the ability to create an agile platform, a hybrid cloud platform that allows you to move things around as things change. So not locking you into one particular solution or cloud.
Where the rubber hits the road is getting somebody to pay for this. So I wanted to bring up the financial aspects of this. I know, Jesse, you said you'd worked on the finance side, not necessarily in the hospital, but probably in terms of the products that you were deploying in the past. And I know Sahan has had some experience in this from some of our previous discussions. So how do you get buy-in on this? I mean, I've done dozens of cybersecurity conferences and moderated, and we know that the CFOs are saying, well, how can we turn cybersecurity into a revenue center? And people sort of roll their eyes and say, okay, well, it's not really meant to be exactly that, but we have to make a pretty good case. And Sahan has talked in the past about CapEx versus OpEx in terms of these kinds of things. And sometimes we just don't even think of it that way. It's storage or it's cybersecurity, and CapEx, OpEx, it just doesn't seem to fit. So Sahan, how do you view this from the finance side, and what are some of the proof points that you use going to senior management on the finance side to say this is a solid investment?
Yeah, I'm very excited to hear Jesse's thoughts on this because of his background. But from my standpoint, we look at it first and foremost as, what are you telling us is the strategic plan? And thankfully, we have a lot of clarity on that gets talked about on an ongoing basis, and that's really the North Star, if you would. That is really what we try and back to. If you want to meet these goals, these are the projects, these are the initiatives that go into meeting those quality outcomes in terms of increasing our brand awareness, whatever the strategic objectives are. Ultimately, it goes back to, we need data to accomplish those outcomes. That data might live in the cloud. It might be a part of some sort of SaaS product, but by and large, we still have a significant amount of on-premise storage, for instance, in our electronic health record, right? Some of that is still on-premise. We need that for whatever reasons. We've made those business decisions. And so in order to ultimately power those outcomes, we make sure that we're tying it back into that. And then I kind of look at it as adding like a candy wrapper around of, look, here's the important part, which is the candy bar, but this wraparound is intended to make sure that that candy stays fresh as long as possible. So we need to protect that data. Here are some ways that we can go about it. And if we don't do those things, here are the risks that I see that we've done our research on. If we choose to accept that risk, that's all right. That is your prerogative as guardians of the organization, as stakeholders ultimately. And so then we start to look at, what is the organization's appetite in terms of, what do we have for capital reserves? how are we going to be tracking return on investment? Maybe some years capital is much more free flowing. We had a great year. Right now, for instance, we are actively working on construction on our campus. That means that more of our capital is being leveraged for other initiatives, right? That's going to be the priority because that is the most direct impact on care, is having facilities that are up, that are amazing, right? That people want to come and take their children to. And so that means, all right, we're going to look more at OpEx where we can. Maybe it's a year where, hey, we want to make sure we're running a little bit leaner for whatever reason. So we're trying to make sure that we're staying attuned. And I would argue that's first and foremost my role in terms of the CISO position is, if I'm doing my job, I'm staying informed on what the organization's priorities are, what are my stakeholders wanting, and how do we fit as much as we can within those guidelines.
I always ask my pediatric hospital panelists a question of whether they feel that they get a little bit more latitude because they're working with children than other healthcare organizations might get in terms of some of these initiatives.
That's a tough question to answer, to be honest. I think overall, you don't work in healthcare if you don't care about the outcomes of helping people. There's too much going on. And so there is definitely that extra lens of you're taking care of children, and it's much different being a patient in a pediatric setting and as a guardian as well, right? If you're a parent or a guardian, whatever context you're going in with, a loved one into these very scary situations, that adds an extra layer for sure. And so that's where especially I think you lean very heavily on that availability side. These kids need care.
Great perspective. Jesse, how about the CFO perspective from you and the finance side?
Yeah. So I think you had mentioned cybersecurity producing revenue, and while I dream of that for healthcare organizations, I don't necessarily think that's going to happen in the short term. But I think when I have conversations with senior leadership regarding purchases, acquisitions, granted, CapEx versus OpEx do come up as a conversation where most non-for-profit healthcare systems that I've worked for prefer the CapEx model because it's less liability and on their books, and then they have the ability to depreciate that. But for a cybersecurity solution for disaster recovery, I think what comes to mind is really doing a cost-benefit analysis for them to provide average ransom costs, restoration costs, cyber liability incurred in cost increases for the next 5 years, resource costs to recover and restore data systems, and ultimately, like I mentioned, reputation. I think reputation for the organization is very hard to quantify. But if you can outline that in a cost-benefit analysis for whether it CapEx or OpEx of an acquisition of a storage platform or even the disaster recovery as a service platform to add onto your environment, it will pay for itself. It will spell out a very good story for the CFO to say, here is the very large number that we would have to pay if we don't have a solution like this readily available versus what we're going to have to go and do. And I think having those initial conversations and using that big impact statement and concerning numbers is something that needs to happen. The CFO and the executive team needs to know if this does happen, this is what will happen to our organization, and cash reserves need to be used, and we'll have to look at whatever money we have, and if we're in construction, we're going to have to cancel it or cancel initiatives that do align with Sahan's idea of aligning it to the business strategy and those strategic plans in the future, because now you have to spend your money where you didn't need to. So really having that will save you in the long run. And I think ultimately, we mentioned before the disaster recovery as a service as a component here. Really, you have to translate RTO, RPO for the organization. Some of these big healthcare organizations that have been impacted take months to come back. And to reduce that down and less, impact the patients, impact your community less is worth all the money in the world when you think about it and you put it on paper. And I think those solutions that are relatively available should be looked at, and the CFO should be engaged, and the CIO and the CISO should all be talking about it because it's something that's relative and that's timely in the times that we're in.
John, are you finding yourself having more direct contact with the chief financial officers and finance types, procurement even maybe, than you have in the past?
Yes, and building off something that Jesse said, obviously in the past 3 years we've had some high-profile, large organization ransomware events, and that's the bad news. The good news is, I don't know, 6+ years ago, some of these topics were more theoretical, and theoretical risk is very difficult to deal with. But now we know, what the impact is going to be if you don't have your systems for a month. And between 0.5% and several percent of revenue is roughly the financial impact. Jesse mentioned that's that's one aspect of the impact, but now we know that when these systems are offline, it does impact people, not only convenience, but prescribed care is not being delivered, and there is higher mortality rates. So the impact is real. I think that's a lot easier to work with CFOs from that perspective. We've got hard financial numbers, and then it's just layering in the kind of that risk-based assessment approach of where the smart investments will need to be made. Clearly, this idea of OpEx, CapEx, these are we're definitely seeing a lot more interest in flexibility, as opposed to kind of the old business model of buying something and trying to think about all the future performance requirement increases or use cases, and overbuying just because you don't want to get stuck. We're definitely seeing a emphasis on more IT agility, where you could make smaller bets today, change direction, and you have investment protection for what decisions you've already made. So, a operating model that is more cloud-like across your entire infrastructure portfolio, regardless if it's acquired OpEx or CapEx. So, definitely seeing more interest in like the business outcomes of those financing mechanisms.
I don't want to get down in the weeds, but are there new kinds of service level agreements that are coming into place as you start deploying things like this, as opposed to does it work or doesn't it work, and how does it meet our business requirements? John,
Absolutely. I think different organizations are looking at different things, but clearly ones that are looking for things as a service, they're getting laser focused on the SLAs. Even in our as a service offering, you can add in a ransomware SLA, where if you are attacked, even if you're able to restore that data quickly, that primary array is a crime scene and you might not be able to touch it for a while. So part of the ransomware SLA is to then get a ship clean box within a very, very short period of time for you to move production on. So I think the experience of the past 3 years, like real world experience, has helped informed what organizations need and want, how they want to acquire it, and the market is responding.
I like the crime scene part that just sort of shocked me just when you said it, but it's true. Jesse, do you have any new kind of form of the relationships that you're developing in terms of service level agreements for the partners you work with?
I think it's always a conversation of based on a SaaS service or software service that you're purchasing, that you hold the vendor accountable for what they're delivering in the service. Now I'm seeing it align to your disaster recovery plans and your business objectives, that when you're partnering with a data company or a storage company or a backup solution that allows you to recover, you need to fall within those SLAs, right? Especially when a disaster strikes, internal, external disaster, you need to recover, and those SLAs need to be met. So then from a contract perspective, you're looking at terms and penalties and all the legal jargon that we won't talk about, but you really need to get really clear as to what is being delivered and what meets your business requirements.
Don, anything new on the SLA side on your side?
Fully agree. Not to be too repetitive, but it goes back to what is the priority, and we try and categorize our applications in terms of what are priority 1 versus 2 and 3, and do the mapping as well, so that things that might seem ancillary that actually go into supporting priority one applications need the appropriate attention. And so for priority one applications, for instance, we'd expect in excess of 3 to 5 nines of availability versus, priority three app that if it's down, not a significant impact to interrupt to business operations, where we have a bit more flexibility on what that SLA mark would be.
Great. So one of the things I'm finding is that governance is becoming cool again. People used to eyes glaze over when you talked about it. Now we have cybersecurity governance, we have AI governance. So you could say data governance in general. And you folks are living in a world where all these governances, if that's a word, come together. So I'm trying to get the balance for dealing with the different forms of governance and the intersections of them as it relates to the scalability of this across the healthcare enterprise. And you're dealing with a lot of characters that in some cases are very cooperative and others are just sort of so. So how would you describe, Jesse, the science of data and security governance in a world of artificial intelligence?
While artificial intelligence being relatively new to healthcare, I think the challenges are mostly the same. You could put 4 or 5 governance committees in a room. They're going to continuously talk about the data protection, privacy, cybersecurity threats, scalability of the solution, regulatory compliance, ethical considerations when it comes to AI doing work for you, or automation. There was some considerations when automation was the new raging tool. Is it getting done appropriately? Who's doing it? Well, is there logs? Others are like interop and just resources in general. All of those kind of come out on the table when these governance committees are talking. And what I find troubling is now AI driven committees or governance committees don't really involve cybersecurity initially, because they're more clinical care focused and solution based. Like, what are we going to do with artificial intelligence in the environment? So I think you'll see the evolution of the security being involved soon as it's really utilized more. As far as cybersecurity, most organizations, like I mentioned, those areas and challenges, it's a constant conversation and to ensure alignment, right? The governance is there to ensure that we all agree upon the strategy, and we have a strategy to begin with, and we're kind of marching towards those goals or those business strategic goals. And that's what I'm seeing from my perspective. As it evolves, as the technology evolves, it's always going to change.
Don, any governance advice you would give to our audience?
I think for us, we share similar views in that the evolution of the CISO role has also, this is a good intersection of how things have changed so much over the last decade, especially. So we're refactoring our data governance completely, actually, right now. We're getting rid of some committees, establishing some new ones. I'm very thankful that we're getting rid of some, because we had way too many realistically. And so myself or representation from InfoSec, we were given the opportunity to say, yes, we should be on these. We don't necessarily need to be on this. We don't need to be on this one because it reports up to this one that we are on. So we're trying to make sure that we're as integrated as possible. We're fortunate that the organization has, from my perspective, hopefully it's accurate, bought into what we're selling essentially, and that we are good partners. And so they do want us at the table to provide that input and make sure that we're all being good stewards ultimately, right? That's really one of the things we look at is data is great. We just want to make sure that it has a useful purpose, that we conform, like Jesse said, to all those different things like the regulatory requirements, but also, is there legal risk in keeping it around? We always have to be very mindful on our end in terms of, well, here are our retention policies, but here are all these very specific exceptions because we do things like research, and that has to live for effectively forever, right? And so that's where especially the intersection of, well, this storage is, we're going to make long-term storage. This is not long-term storage, and being able to effectively document that. I think everywhere struggles with that. And so this is an opportune time to try and establish more mature processes in that realm.
That's great. That's perfect. John, from a seller of solutions, where do you bump into governance issues?
Well, I mean, clearly, whenever an organization is making a decision, it usually is in some form of governance is helping prioritize that. But I would say the perennial theme that we see is around not necessarily obviously whenever there's investment decisions and looking at the risk versus the dollars that are available. But I think a really smart IT strategy is around simplification, rationalizing the portfolio, not deciding what new thing we're going to do, but what of the existing portfolio can go away, free up money for smarter decisions in the future. So portfolio rationalization, simplifying the environment, consolidating, getting rid of legacy systems. All those are just not super interesting, but a great discipline to free up money for strategic investments.
Great. I want to get a little bit away from the technology just for a moment. One of the things that I do a lot of work on is the breach response strategy. So what happens after it happens? I know Pure Storage has done a lot about that from a technology point of view, but there's the softer side of it that I'm interested in as well. How do you have a formalized communications plan if something happens, and how that communications flow goes and the messaging that complements the technology side of it that you're putting into place to stop it, or as John said, bringing in was it a clean box or a pure box to start fresh from the crime scene? Jesse, what are some of the communications strategies that have really nothing to do with the technology itself that does your organization have in place after this kind of thing happens? Not that it's happened there, but if it did happen.
Well, I think it's happening because of third parties, right? I think even if it doesn't happen directly, it's happening just by sheer partnership and through your business associates. But I think for me, any communication needs to be very well thought out. And it needs to be, if it is regarding a breach or potentially impacting patients, or even mostly your employees are your patients as well. So you need to be very sensitive. It needs to be reviewed by legal. It needs to be looked at by outside or inside counsel, your insurance companies, however you're handling it, because it needs to be precise. I think we get lost, talking about tech jargon. We're talking about what happened. All they need to know is what happened and what we're doing about it. The intricacies of what bad actor and where they came from, and the vulnerability or the threat that was acted upon. Sometimes that gets well too far in the weeds for most of the individuals that are receiving any information or communication. But I think starting there is the first part. I think reporting up from my level to executive leadership, you can't be very technical. It needs to be very clear. It needs to be open and honest. This is what happened. It happened because of X, and this is what we need to do to recover from it. Now, in the future, there should certainly be an open forum and open conversation of, while this did happen, if we had X, Y, and Z, it could have been prevented. Or if we had X, Y, and Z, it could have been a smoother transition to recover. And those conversations drive additional purchases, acquisitions, different strategies. Again, the more transparent you can be with what's the circumstance and the issue that you're having, and with managing both up and around and to your community as well as your patients and your employees, I think we'll get the point across.
Don?
Yeah, absolutely. The only things I would add on there, once again, so well said. We really look at, what are the mediums that we want to communicate on? How do we make sure that we're only giving what we know for sure? Because there's always a lot of speculation initially, and that can be a bit of a distraction. And what do people need to know about what we are doing, and what do they need to know? For instance, in those situations, what's the impact on services rendered? Are you still able to come into the ED or the ER? Are we doing patient diversions? Is your personal portal available to see your medical record? Are we doing anything else in terms of services not rendered? Can you even call us, right? Those are sometimes things that are very relevant for our patients to know. And it needs to be very clear. Here's where to go. Here's authoritative information, because even in those situations, you have to watch out for people just throwing out random stuff and creating a lot of swirl. And you need to make sure that it's very clear. This is actually what's going on to the best of your ability. And we're very fortunate. We have a great media team, especially for external comms, and our public information officers and our legal departments are very in lockstep in terms of when we go through our tabletop drills, here are the things that we want to commit to saying up front in these theoretical situations. And here are the things we should really avoid for risk or for ambiguity or whatever it might be.
I think that would make for another good session. John, I'm sure they're all asking you, like, how quickly we're going to get this back up. Any other parts of that breach response that you get involved in?
Really, no. In our context, we're not involved with that. We spend most of our time trying to figure out how to make sure those things don't happen, or provide information from the storage perspective up to the security fabric or something else to prevent those things from being necessary.
I just want to jump into something that has been evolving, and it's been very slow on the government side related to the Health and Human Services cybersecurity performance goals. I'm wondering how much our practitioners in the group here have been involved in those programs, what effect it's going to have in terms of deploying cybersecurity, obviously, and as it relates to storage. Jesse, any thoughts of that HPH cybersecurity performance goals, or CPGs as they're calling them these days?
More acronyms for healthcare. I honestly, I think it's a great idea at face value that we are going to provide goals to healthcare organizations to align, to build a baseline of security in their environment. And it's well needed, and I think it's well past the date of when it was needed. But it's certainly something that the government is providing, and it's great. I think it does provide some confusion because it aligns not just NIST's goals, but it aligns NIST, CISA, and other baselines. HICP, I believe, is another acronym, but it aligns all three of them, and it creates this baseline of requirements and protocols that you need to put in place. And I think it's a great thing. My concern is for some of the organizations that have not adopted this on their own well in advance, that do not have all the requirements, that now this becomes a very difficult conversation, because you have immediately overnight, if these are mandated, now you have a list of requirements that you need to achieve, and you may not have the capital funding or the resource funding. So now not only is the government providing these baselines, they may need to also provide grants to allow funding of these requirements to healthcare facilities. And to be honest, healthcare facilities right after recent breaches are very constrained from a financial perspective. This is not the greatest time to be requesting, them increasing and implementing new technologies around cybersecurity. But again, it's almost a cost of doing business. Cybersecurity, as well as these technologies, is what allows the businesses to move forward. So I think back to the communication, here are the new goals, here are the baselines that we need to achieve and align to. Like I mentioned, hopefully my organization has already aligned with NIST and succeeded there. Hopefully other organizations have already adopted them and do achieve most of these baselines. But I think it's going to be a tough conversation for those that have not.
I like to taunt our government affairs people and ask if this is the cybersecurity equivalent of meaningful use, and they get very they get very upset. I say, is there money involved in this as well? Hassan, any thoughts on the government programs, the performance goals?
Yeah, incredibly well intentioned. We're still trying to figure out what is the long-term impact, because this is such a broad thing to bring forward, and they're never as simple as they seem. And so I think there are a lot of great controls in there. And so from a pure, how do you cover general risk reduction? There are a lot of great things in there, but like Jesse said, it goes back to, if you aren't already in alignment, how are you going to pay for it? And then just culturally, change is so difficult, right? And we do a lot of change management already, and then suddenly you add this imperative behind it, that is a lot to ask of our operational partners, right? Even just being more used to, having more MFA in front of the workflows, right? That those are things where you have to really look at, are we going too far and causing more burnout, more impact on our clinicians, and causing risk in other areas just for the sake of mitigating these other risks, right? So that one of the things I like is that we still have a measure of nuance and can make some of those risk decisions ourselves.
John, how does the solutions provider react to performance goals, things like that? Is that a positive in terms of trying to get people to scale things that they don't normally have?
Well, I mean, if an organization, finds extreme value in these CPGs, to Sahan and Jesse's point, they probably, don't have the requisite skill or program in place. They should be well beyond it. But fundamentally, when it comes to a broad area like cybersecurity, if there is a widely adopted framework that allows us to point out features or capabilities that align and support that, then that's a good thing. If I could go through the NIST framework and point out all the features that support the NIST framework for a CISO, that would be helpful. The features in a vacuum would be like hanging Christmas tree ornaments without the tree there. They just fall on the floor. So it gives us something to, a common framework to talk about different risks and solutions on. The Baldrige cybersecurity framework or excellence builder, starting to see some people interested in that, taking it a little further. If the NIST framework and the Baldrige national quality criteria kind of had a baby, that's what it would look like. But it goes beyond those best practices. It talks about the organizational performance and how it's measured and workforce, and a lot deeper into an effective, high quality program.
Well, that's to wrap up, gentlemen. Everybody, if you're not talking about AI, you're talking about what happened with the Change Healthcare situation with the breach there. From a practitioner's point of view, Jesse, I mean, you're in this business all the time, so it's probably a little bit less shocking to you than it would be to the general public that can't get their prescriptions. But from the practitioner point of view, how did that change what you've done, or did it simply just magnify what you already knew?
I think it shined a light on your services and your vendors that you partner with and what single points of failure that they themselves have. And then from a merger acquisition, the government allowed two organizations to merge, and the output of that caused a single point of failure across all healthcare, right? So I think moving forward, I think this is going to change the landscape from the allowance of this and kind of, going along the lines of a monopoly. But from a healthcare provider, it did impact us significantly. It impacted our bottom line. It impacted patient billing, not just pharmacy. It was hard because you're just on breach calls and getting notifications of what an organization's doing. Similarly, like we were just talking about SLAs, but there was nothing to do. There was almost no clear information on what we could do. And even local government and federal government at the time were suggesting, oh, why can't we just switch, or why can't we do that? Well, you can't. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't happen. So while most of us in healthcare were able to do workarounds that sufficed, with about 70% of us getting bills out the door, and approximately the pharmacy changes, changing the bins in the background and changing your provider, about 2 to 3 weeks of issue. I think the largest thing was the impact to patients coming into the hospital. They couldn't get their prescriptions. They were getting charged for the price. The work to go back to the insurance provider was now put back onto the patient. So it slowed care. And I think instances like this from a cybersecurity perspective make you look deeper at contracts, make you look at your partners, make you understand your vulnerabilities where previously I think we just put so much reliance on the vendor that the vendor is going to do it for us. And I think now is it going to be a change where is this vendor a single point of failure, and what do we do if it happens?
I was just an unrelated note. I was talking to another association who said, not healthcare related, who said that they can't cut checks still, that because of the integration of some of the finance software, that they still can't cut checks to print out. They could do electronic, but they can't cut checks. Sahan, how did it change your life?
Pun intended. I would say that we were incredibly fortunate overall. Honestly, we had some of the impact, but mainly the still ongoing issue for us has been on eligibility verification. But thankfully, in pediatrics, you tend to have a lot of repeat encounters, so you have some of that information already. So it's been, unfortunately, very impactful for our folks in operations in the ED and ER, which is not really the ideal spot for any sort of slowdown. Not that it would ever prevent or delay care realistically, but it just adds time when you're doing those processes. I do think, like Jesse mentioned, though, it was really interesting to see from, I like to think of it as like a chaos theory thing, right? We thought we only had one or two points of integration with them. Turns out some of our vendors had them on the back end. We had realistically no idea, or at least I didn't. And so suddenly we're hearing, well, actually, this is also impacted.
The multiplier effect. Yeah.
Exactly, right. And so I agree that it's going to be very eye-opening as we start to look at what other services, both from a digital as well as a physical standpoint, are more integral into our operations than we previously realized. And as we spent so many years, for instance, having chip delays for manufacturing, and that made it harder to just get switches and network gear, right? What are those other key resiliency points that we haven't addressed? And personally, I would say, yeah, the government does have a very strong role in shoring that up for the betterment of the outcomes for our patients ultimately, right? All of it goes back to delivering on care, and these things are a part of that. And so it's a fascinating world and so much to talk about there for sure.
That's great. John, how did the call volume go up at Pure Storage during that original period where people were wondering, trying to make some sense of how this might affect them?
Yeah, I don't recall any additional calls on our side. So I think Jesse and Sahan did a good job of pointing out, they're not surprised, but what was different about this particular issue.
That's great. That's great. So I think we've exhausted our time right now. I'd like to thank you all for your time, and I'd like to thank Pure Storage for their sponsorship of this session. John, any closing remarks that you might have to?
I just always a pleasure to talk with you, and looking forward to really continuing to progress the protection of what is really critical infrastructure for our nation.
Fantastic. Thank you again for your time. Thank you to our audience, and I hope I get to work with you all again. Have a good day.
It's a pleasure having us.